Trishan, the founder of Data Collective and your host for today in this room. We're going to kick off with the science of growth, methodologies for driving record-breaking success, titled Your Winning Product Playbook, with your moderator, Mallorie Brodie, co-founder and CEO of Bridget. As co-founder of Bridget, Mallorie has been disrupting the predominantly male industry of construction, leading her organization with a gender-balanced team, and has raised over $7 million. Mallorie holds various entrepreneurial awards, including receiving the top prize at the 2015 Google Demo Day, and has been named Tech Vibe's Entrepreneur of the Year and the 2019 Forbes Manufacturing and Industry 30 Under 30. Joining Mallorie today is Gulati, founder and CEO of Ordway Labs, and Ralf, Dagher, Director of Engineering at Veem, who you can find upstairs, I believe, in the trade show area. And I'll pass it over to Mallorie to introduce the panelists.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, so much for joining. Really excited to be here. Ottawa's my hometown, so I am really excited to be back. Before we get into the panel, I just want to give one quick food tip for anyone that it's their first time in Ottawa. If you haven't tried a beaver tail, you should try one. And there's a special thing you can ask for, which is half cheese and half cinnamon and sugar. So it's like lunch and dessert in one. So anyways, really recommend that if you're walking through the Byward Market. Now we'll get into the serious stuff. So really happy to be here again with both Samir from Ordway and Ralf from Veem. We're going to chat a little bit about their companies and specifically their product organizations. So we'll start off with a quick intro. Could you tell us a little bit about your company, what amount of funding you've done, what size you're at, and about your product as well?
Hey everyone, it's been awesome here this week at SaaS North. It's first year that we have come to Ottawa, so it's awesome, and thanks for hosting the panel. So Ordway, we are a billing automation solution. We bridge the gap between sales and finance by automating invoicing, payment processing, revenue recognition. It's a huge pain point for a lot of finance organizations. They're doing things manually a lot, and that's where Ordway has built a framework to bridge that gap for a lot of manual inefficiencies in back office finance.
Perfect. How many people are on your team today?
So we are 25 people. We have raised $2.5 million in funding so far, and that's pretty much how far we have come.
Awesome. Thank you. And Ralf, could you tell us a little bit about Veem, please?
Yeah, before I start, I just want to add, beaver tails are great, but shawarma is what you have to try in Ottawa.
That's true. Ottawa is known for their shawarma.
Go to Shawarma Palace on Rideau. Tell them Ralf sent you, and I was there last night after the VIP party. It was fantastic. So Veem, we're a software business payment company. We make it very easy for businesses to make business payments. Traditionally, it's been a tough thing to do. We were pioneers in the space where we introduced multiple rails that really made it easy for users to do their payments. We're about 100 plus users right now. Employees right now, and we've raised, the last round we raised about 25 million. Before that, I believe we raised up to 65 million, maybe a little more. But yeah, we're doing well.
Perfect. And so I know both of you have products in market, but before you can actually start the development of a product, you need to identify some sort of need from your customers. So I want to talk a little bit about how that initial need was identified in the market. Was it through something someone said to you one time and you followed the breadcrumbs? Was it an aha moment like everyone dreams they're going to have? What was the true beginning of your company when it came to the beginning of the product development process?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. So just to provide some context, in the payment industry, there's generally two ways that you can make payments. One way is involves bank wires and checks. I'm sure some of you guys have used that way. It's very painful. You have to provide your banking information. There's zero traceability. There's zero transparency. The other way is centered around a payment network where you have an identity. Your bank information is private. And in this way, it's definitely the more preferred approach. But until Veem entered the market, it was very much restricted to consumers only. And that was the gap that Marwan, our founder and CEO, saw. He wanted to take advantage of that, wanted to capitalize on that, to take this network concept that works so well for consumers and apply it to businesses. That was the idea. Do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to get into MVP? And
yeah, I just had one other question. So I know multi-rail technology has been sort of a key differentiator for you.
Sure.
And so specifically in the product development, like how did you know that that was going to be the thing that would set you apart in the industry that you're in?
That's a great question. So for us, just before we get there, I want to mention that for the MVP, we wanted to experiment with our first rail, which nobody else was doing at the time. We were pioneers in that space. Cryptocurrency was our first rail. We tried it in the Philippines. We had customers that wanted to pay their vendors in the Philippines, and we wanted to test this idea that Marwan had, and it worked very well. And now we have over 150,000 customers in over 100 countries. But the thing that we noticed, that we knew right away, is that you can't just use that one rail for all the different payment destinations, all different users. The best way to describe it is maybe using transportation. If you're in Ottawa, you want to go to Paris, you probably fly. If you want to go to Montreal, you take the train. If you want to go from downtown Ottawa to the West End, maybe the LRT, or not. These days, I don't know, take your chance on that. But seriously, if joking aside, if you're 4 people and you want to go there, maybe Uber is more efficient. There isn't one mode of transportation that is perfect for all destinations and all people involved. And the same thing applies to payment. Bank wires is definitely not the most efficient way to make payments all the time. In some cases it is, but in other cases not. So at Veem we use multiple rails. One rail is crypto, as I mentioned. That one is widely successful. Another rail is treasury. We also use bank wires. In some cases it makes sense. And then the most recent rail we've started using is debit cards. We move money on debit cards. We're unique in that way, and that's really what sets us apart from the rest.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so Samir, over to you. What was sort of the initial, how did you come up with the initial idea before you started product development?
Sure. The aha moment is a little bit of a misnomer. It's never an overnight aha moment. It's an aha moment in the making that takes a little bit of time. And I'll use your analogy. We actually had a different analysis if I use a transportation analogy, you can use different transportations to get from one point to another based on your need. Our thinking was in the world of billing software and in the world of finance software, there are different modes of transportation depending upon what you need. But there is no mode of transportation that gets you to solve all your needs. When we started doing market research on where the pain points exist in back office finance, it was not, oh, I am struggling with this or I'm struggling with that. You may be doing this thing well, but you may be struggling with another thing poorly. But when you put the entire workflow from contract lifecycle, from the time you close the deal with the sales, when the sales guy closes the deal, how you invoice it, how you process the payment for it, how you recognize revenue for it, the entire process is very, very painful. So for us, the aha moment was, you start talking to a customer, you start listening to their pain point, you're like, aha, there is an opportunity. That aha moment just keeps getting louder and louder when you have more of these market research interviews. So we did about 30 market research interviews before we wrote a single line of code to build the product. That was more trying to understand where the pain points are, where the back office finance is struggling today, and that's how it came about basically. So yeah, it's breadcrumbs, it's an aha moment, but it just keeps getting louder and louder with more market validation,
Yeah, we're a more mature organization now at Bridget, but I certainly remember in the early days having an Excel spreadsheet, tracking all the MRR amounts and everything to track invoices from there, and you get one formula wrong in that spreadsheet and your numbers aren't right. So
our sales guys should talk to your finance guys, so.
For sure. After the panel, we'll do some deals. I'm sure you need some construction software too. So you have a really interesting background, Samir. You're working at a number of large companies. So I know Workday was on them. You can talk a little bit more about some of the other experiences, but always in product roles, product leadership roles. And this is the first time you've made the leap to being the CEO and co-founder. So how has that transition been for anyone that's currently in a product role? What does that jump look like?
Yeah, for sure. I've been fortunate to be part of founding product teams for companies that have become large billion-dollar companies like Workday and Intact. There are some Intact guys over here, right? Anyone in this room? No? Yeah, we're too cool for them. Yes, the role of a product person is is frankly a minuscule CEO role to begin with. We say the same thing in our company, that the product managers are CEOs of their product. They are empowered to make sure that their product is successful. If you are a product company and you are building products, you are essentially the CEO of your product. You are responsible for making sure that the customers who use the product are successful. You will get credit for a job well done. You will also get blamed for a job not well done if it's a. So to answer your question, it is not been that hard if you really look at from a role perspective. Yes, I didn't have to deal with investors earlier, but now I do. But other than that,
You didn't have the privilege.
I didn't have the privilege, or it depends on how you what you call it. But from a day-to-day execution perspective, it's been pretty seamless in the way that what we do today as a company is what a product manager does as well. We talk to customers a lot. We work with customers very, very closely. As a company, we embed ourselves in the company's workflow when it comes to finance. And essentially, that's how we are building the product. That's how we are building the company. And that's how the transition has come about. So I would say it's been pretty smooth for the most part.
Yeah, I definitely found that the whole product development and product research process is also a great way to build your early sales pipeline early on. So all of those product interviews that you're doing, if you end up delivering on a part of the conversation that you maybe had from a product perspective, then you can go back to those people and more easily start selling your products. So that's just another benefit from getting out early and talking to your customers.
Yeah, one more point is product people are great salespeople because they really know the domain. They are experts in their product. So 9 out of 10 times in an enterprise sale, a product guy has to get involved towards the end of the sales cycle because nobody is buying your software just because, the brand looks cool. It's nice let's go to a new flashy billing software. No, they really will get into the weeds of what pain points you can solve for us. And to some extent, product expertise will come into play. So that definitely helps.
For sure. No, that's awesome. So before we move on to the next set of questions, has anyone in the audience read the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie? Or maybe they've read it to their children? Put your hand up if you've read it.
I read it last night.
You read it last night? Seriously?
Yeah, I read it.
Oh, weird. Telepathic.
There's a show now on Prime. It's the same show.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You
Okay.
can watch the show.
I will do that tonight. Big night. Gonna watch that cartoon. So at Bridget, we often talk about this as it relates to product development. So the first few pages of the book are, if you give a mouse a cookie, they'll ask you for a glass of milk. And if you give them a glass of milk, they'll go over to the mirror to see if they have a milk mustache. And when they see that they have a milk mustache, they'll ask you for a napkin. And the book just goes on for 30 pages, essentially how it's very hard to always 100% satisfy this mouse because they'll always want something else. And when it comes to product development, there's so many different stakeholders that you're trying to satisfy. You're trying to satisfy your board, your investors, customers, the internal team. So I was wondering if, Ralf, you could start us out and talk through some of those tensions that exist when it comes to developing your product roadmap. Who do you prioritize first? How do you go through that prioritization process when, being one of the executives at the company, I know you always feel like you could do more and more and more. So how do you go through that process and make those decisions?
In one sentence, it's not easy. That's one. But we have several channels. Externally, we have a great product marketing team. They tend to do surveys and cold calls where they reach out to the customers, the ones that don't necessarily call you, but you still want to get their opinion. We have a customer success team. They're the front line. They hear all the struggles that the customers are going through. So they understand more the pain points of what's going on versus the need of what would be cool. And then we have a sales team. They have usually close relationships with some of the customers. So they have also some understanding as to what those guys are looking for. So that's external. On the internal side, we also want feedback for some of our stakeholders. So we have an ideation Slack channel. That's a fantastic channel. We have interns, C-level executives. Everyone is pitching in some great ideas. Some not so great, but generally overall, it's pretty good. And then we also internally organize hackathons every now and then, where Veemers get to build out their ideas and showcase it to the rest of the company. It gets very competitive. We have a trophy. It's on Andrew's desk right now. He's very protective of that. But those are all different ways where you'd be surprised where the great ideas come from. You have to hear it from the external, but it's also good to hear it from the internal as well. The product team will then take all that information, prioritize it, work with the sales, work with the engineering team to come up with solutions that are technically sound. And what helps us a lot is that we have a fast development cadence. We have a 2-week sprint cycle. It rarely fails. So you build fast MVPs, you put it out, you test the market that way, see how it's doing, then you tweak it with subsequent sprints until you have something that's working very well. We just did Veem Capital recently and locked rates that way, and they're doing better than when they did at the beginning. You have to be agile enough to be able to do that, and it allows you to be a lot more experimental, which is fantastic. We've had failures too, but when we fail fast, and we learn from our mistakes. So I think this is also something where some of our bank competitors, the banking industry, they struggle with that because for banks, big banks, change is not something they can do quickly. It takes them, so they have to be very careful with what they roll out because it takes them a while to fix it or change it if they need to. And so that's the advantage that we have over the rest of the industry in that way.
That's great. Yeah, so it sounds like you have a good set of stakeholders that you're pulling the initial ideas from. When you're in sort of a product prioritization meeting where a decision's going to get made, who ultimately is making that decision? Is it the CEO? Is it a VP of product? Who makes the final call when that tension exists?
So just I want to say something maybe because we didn't really, some people are asking, why is the head of engineering here talking about product? When I was hired by my job, he said, I need you to build up an engineering team here in Ottawa. Started doing that, fantastic. And 2 months in, he said, we need an integration PO. We don't have one. Can you help out for a little bit, just a little bit? And I said, okay. 2 years later, I'm still that integration PO. So I have a good understanding I have a much better understanding of that product decision. It's tough. It's probably the hardest hat that I have to wear right now. It's the heaviest one. It's really, there's a lot of burden there when you think about all the different stakeholders. How do you prioritize? You need to present your case to the executives, to the company really, whoever's involved. And you have to build it based on what you think the right thing to do is. You need to take all that feedback from them. At the end of the day, some voices are louder than others. That's fine. To me, what's more important is how you maintain the path. So, okay, fine, decision is made. That's what we want to do.
So who makes the decision?
That's a good question. So there's a lot of, Marwan, at the end of the day, our investors, I mean, we're a payment company, and innovation in payment and growing our global network, that's our ethos. That's what we aim for, right? So the ideas, as long as the ideas are around that, that's what we strive for. We try different things. Our executives definitely have a louder say. Marwan has a big say, but he's very good at listening to the rest of the organization to see the feedback. And he's very good also at acknowledging when we try something and it fails, it failed, and something else may have been better. So there's different stakeholders. Some have more expertise, and it helps. There's a lot of signals the feedback that we get that help us make those decisions. But at the end of the day, we have a leadership team that definitely gives us the direction to head into, and the rest of the team, the product team in particular, will find the best way to get there.
Perfect, thank you. Samir, so at Ordway, does that sound like a familiar process for you? Any major differences from how your product team operates and makes decisions?
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, yes, but the way we like to optimize our product roadmap and strategy, we call them the 3 R's of product development: reach, revenue, and retention. How do we prioritize something? When the company is getting started, you want to optimize for how quickly can we reach customers, right? And there's always the tussle between this customer, this feature will get us a new customer versus this feature will get us more revenue. And then third R is retention. There's always your existing customers who are asking for more features, more things, and you have to balance it out. What do you optimize the product roadmap for? If you have the resources and you can do all three in parallel and create three silos, great. But you have to stack rank each product feature on what is going to take more priority and so forth. And at the end of the day, yes, sometimes there is a louder voice in the room than the other, and that loud voice can come from an existing customer, can come from one of the product managers responsible for their areas, or it could be some future sales prospect or sales guy who wants this feature because he wants to close this deal, so he wants that commitment in the contract. So that's how basically our product roadmap also comes about.
Yeah, I think that's a really simple way to keep it in mind, 3 Rs. That's definitely worth applying, even at our organization, just a really clear way to split it up. So I really like that. Can you think of a time where you had to prioritize one of those Rs and there was like a lot of tension within the organization, but it was just a decision that as a CEO you had to make, and what did that story look like?
Yeah, every day. You never want to develop one feature just for one customer, right? As a product company, you want to optimize your product roadmap that has maximum benefit to not only your existing customers but future customers as well. But every day, as an enterprise software company, you will hear one customer make more noise than the other that, hey, this is something we really, really need and we haven't been getting it from you. And sometimes you make exceptions and like, you got to keep this customer happy. So let's put this in that. This is something we have always wanted to do. Let's prioritize this higher. We obviously will not do something just for one customer, but we could increase the priority of something that is in the roadmap anyways to bring it up front, basically.
No, it's always difficult. It's as I said, it's as soon as you give them one thing, then they want a more robust feature. It inspired them to think of a new feature. So there's always more to deliver on the product side, for sure.
Which is why we want to build a train that can take you anywhere you want. Maybe there's a hovercraft, new mode of transportation that just takes over everything else. So.
Yeah, for sure. Shifting gears a little bit to the way financing your company actually can impact the product roadmap for anyone who's a founder out in the crowd and might be thinking of bringing on new investors. There's lots of different ways you can go with angels, venture capitalists, strategic investors. I know one thing we've always considered with strategic investors is if you bring on a strategic investor, will that potentially prevent other customers from wanting to buy from you if they're competitors? So lots of considerations there. Now I know at Veem there's a number of strategic investors that you have, different banks that you've brought on board to invest in the company. How has that affected your roadmap as a company, your position in the industry? Was that a great decision for the company? Has it not changed anything? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean we do have a few bank investors. We have NAB, Silicon Valley Bank, SBI. These are banks that I think they recognize that change is needed in the industry, and I think they're not in a great position to do it themselves. So in some ways, they want to invest in us to be that machine that can get it done. They give us, we listen to their advice on what markets to focus on. We can tap into their resources, so all that is taken into consideration. But at the end of the day, going back to that ethos thing that I said, we're about payment innovation and that global network that we want to grow. Fortunately, all these strategic investors we've had so far, they're on board with that. They like the direction we're going. They want us to go that way. But if we get an investor that wants to invest and they don't believe in that, we say no. And we're in a position to do that right now, which is good because that is our identity. So we have been in a position we've said no, and that's fine. That's okay.
Yeah, so I think just like any round of financing, you want to be aligned with your investors, you want them aligned with your vision, and it doesn't sound like that's changed too much from the strategic versus maybe the more traditional VC side. Yeah, no, it hasn't. And it's there were 1 or 2 cases where we did try something different, didn't work out as well, and there was a good lessons learned for us, where we realized, okay, we need to stick to what we do well, make payments simple, as Marwan likes to say, as simple as buying coffee, grow that network, and the investors that we want are those that truly believe in that. So that's a formula that's working, and
there's a lot of people that want to invest in us, so it's easy for us to say no to someone that will try and take us in another direction, because it becomes a problem.
Right. And Samir, on your side, have your investors been really hands-on with the product roadmap? Is that something that founders can expect? Or are they hands-off and they know that you're the expert in the space and defer to you and to your team?
Yeah. So in our story, we have only raised one round of funding. It was our seed round. We haven't, excuse me, we have been fortunate. We haven't needed the capital. So our investors have been very helpful for customer acquisition, for sure. They have certainly been helpful in yes, they recognize that I bring a lot of industry expertise and domain expertise to this, but they have been instrumental in introducing to prospective clients and prospective investors in the future and so forth. As far as the product roadmap is concerned, at least at this stage, they have left us to do our thing. They trust what we are doing, and they align with our long-term vision. They also buy into the 3 R's of product development, and they trust we are doing the right thing to figure out what we need to do for the company. But strategically, we have conversations ongoing with future investors whom we are trying to align more strategically with where we want to be 10 years from now. And I think it's very important that we find the right strategic investors who aligns themselves with our thinking where we would be 10 years from now, basically, for sure.
Yeah, I think we can definitely relate to that. So even though we don't use the 3R framework, but if you can get your board or get your investors to really trust whatever decision-making framework it is that you have as a product organization, then I think there's a lot of trust that can be built there. So they don't need to be involved in every decision, but they know there's a framework, they know there's a process around how you're prioritizing things, and I think that can bring a lot of comfort. The other thing that can bring a lot of comfort is having a really strong team within your company leading the product organization. Are there a couple things that either of you look for when interviewing your next product or design candidates that you have found to be absolutely critical to the success of delivering on your product roadmap? We can start with you, Samir.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my simple philosophy of hiring is to hire people better than me, right? Like that's how you make the organization scalable. You definitely need to find people with the right talent, but right commitment and right passion is an important aspect of the job too. We like to say that skills can be taught, passion sometimes can't always be taught, right? So the commitment and to get things done is really important. But how do you do that? We certainly try to optimize for people who are smart, people who can execute it themselves, and we empower everybody to. We are very flat in our organization to be fully transparent, and we want to hire people who don't need to be managed. That's what we try to optimize for.
Perfect. And how about you at Veem? What are some of the key things that you're looking for with your product and even engineering team as well?
Yeah, I'm involved in the interviews, and given how many different stakeholders you can have, for me, it's very important that you hire somebody that has that can relate to people, can communicate well with people, bring people together. That's an important thing for us that we look for. I've seen it firsthand where you have the POs that work very well with an engineering team, and that's fantastic. It's for all the product people. Have a good relationship with your engineers. They will take you a long way. Buy them a cup of coffee. It's very important, as well as other stakeholders. But those are the kind of people that we find. Of course, you need passion. You need expertise. Expertise is important. It's important to have a nice mix. So we have people with a lot of great experience, which is great for us. We have a great product team that way. But we've also promoted people from within that were not product before, that are still doing also a fantastic job and didn't have that expertise, but because they have the right mentality, the right personality, and they get along with people and they can bring people together, get them to agree on something. Lastly, I will say that it's important to get visionaries, people that can, say, this is the vision, fantastic vision, great vision. But if you're not going to get in the weeds with us to tell us, to help us get there, I need someone else to do it then as well. So either you hire 2 people to do that, or somebody gives you the vision, somebody else is doing the PM work, to help us get there. Or the ideal person is the person that can think about what the vision is and then help us get there by getting in the weeds and doing proper PMing along the way.
Yeah, you definitely need to be thinking on, multiple timelines at all times. What's the 5-year plan? What's the 3-year plan? What are we doing next week? And if you don't have people that can think on, all of those layers, or a couple people, then it ends up being really difficult to progress the product organization within your company.
And it's important for the product people to help to, if you take a user story, it's a simple thing. It's like, I want to so that. A lot of people don't pay enough attention to the so that. They're very prescriptive in what they want, and it doesn't allow the rest of the team to solution along with you. Keep it open. Let the team solution with you, and after that, agree on something and write it down as requirements. That way, you have a common agreement for you to get there. Vision is good, but we still need to execute properly to get to what it is that we're thinking of as a vision.
Actually started Bridget without anyone on our team with a software background or without a software engineer, and so did about 500 interviews getting started and couldn't write a line of code, and so we're using existing apps to bring on construction sites and get the users to use a small feature set that we were planning on adding to the product, or clickable prototypes, as you said. And I think we went a whole year before we actually started building something, and then it was far less expensive to build because we didn't have so much rework. We weren't wrong in our assumptions. So yeah, it really resonates definitely with the beginning of our company as well. And I think that's a great insight for everyone in the audience. So we're going to move on to audience questions. Does anyone have a question? And it could have a bit more of an engineering spin to it, or product. We have both experts here today. All right.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. My question is, when you launch new features, how do you measure the value of this feature? Do you run experiments, or do you push it in the wild and hope nothing breaks or log errors? And if you found something really valuable to the customer, how do you scale this feature projection? How do you schedule follow-up features on when something's really, really valuable? Do I make sense?
Do you want to take this?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. You should never be afraid to take chances. You just need to be able to control the scope of the change. And by scope of the change, I mean two things. First, you want to do things in an iterative fashion. But also, you want to do a bit of A/B type of thing where only a small part of your customer base is being impacted by it. Never roll out without having a way for you to measure how it's doing, whether it's through your data or whatever tools that you want to use to see how the customer experience is. There's things like LogRock and other things where you can see what the customer is going through, or you can analyze your data. We have a data team now with data scientists, engineers, analysts that help us look to see what's actually going on. And that's very important. But don't wait till the whole thing is ready for everybody, because you're killing yourself. Roll out an MVP that you can provide to a small segment, see how it does. If it's not doing so well, or if there's changes that are needed, then with the next sprint, roll out some changes, maybe even hot fixes, have a continuous delivery model where you can do that. And then when you see that for that small sample set it's doing well, push it out to the rest. Take chances. Just be ready to fail fast if it does fail. You need to be able to kill it, learn from that experience, have a nice retrospect, and then make sure you have another success after that so that the energy is better for the next project. Does that answer your question?
Anything you wanted to add to that, Samir?
Sure. So in our world of enterprise software, we do beta releases to a handful of customers. I'm going to extend to what Ralf was saying. Yes, you release a new feature in a very measured way before you do a mass release to everybody. In our world, we will see, okay, which are the customers who benefit from this or asked for this. So we roll it out on a measured basis to a handful of customers. So we are able to work with them, make sure that all the kinks are removed, and we fine-tune it before we roll out to the whole wide world, basically.
Perfect. We have time for one more question. Anyone else with a question to do with product development, prioritization? Okay, we got one at the back.
Thanks for the talk. It was great. Just wanted to ask a question about how important is defining your development lifecycle, so start to finish with all of the pieces, and then how important is it to follow it?
So I'll start. So I think a process is important. I think it's important for every organization to define their own process, right? And to some extent, there are scores and scores of books on how to run a product lifecycle, software development lifecycle, but it has to fit in your organizational culture. It has to fit in your organization. There are scrums of the world, agile development of the world, waterfalls of the world, but what works for your organization and for your market, right? So we have also adopted a 2-week sprint cycle. That works really well for us. But at the same end, we also take a little bit longer term view of the software cycle. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, one of our products is for revenue recognition. It's finance. Now, we have a roadmap that is extending the next 12 months, but every feature touches the next thing that we want to do. So how do we create a long 12-month vision, but break it down into 2-week sprint cycles? So a process is absolutely very, very important, and how you follow up after every 2-week sprint to see what was done correctly and take that feedback to the next sprint is absolutely paramount to us. Does that help answer in some extent?
I'm going to add, I agree with everything Samir said. I'll just add one more thing, is that I think one important thing in addition to process is a bit of a structure. I think it's important that you line up your organization, so your engineering/product teams, call them scrum teams, call them whatever it is that you want to call them. But I think it's important that you split them up by domain, where they're cross-functional teams. So if you have front-end, back-end, QA, PO, all on the same team, so that within that domain, they can deliver things in isolation. And they have no dependencies on other teams. It allows you to be a lot more faster. You have a faster cadence in that way. For us, that was a big thing. And then you want to ensure that across those teams, there's common practices when it comes to best practices and processes. So you want to set up tribes or something like Spotify does, like we do, where there's consistency across the team. So that if I take an engineer from team Harry and I want to put him on team Philip, the domain may be a bit different, but the practices and the technologies are very consistent, and then it allows them to start performing a lot quicker in that way. That's just an addition. Everything else, what he said, fantastic. Do that too.
We're an aligned panel today.
But just, may I just plug?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
We are hiring. We're looking for people. We're looking for great engineers. We're looking for everything. We're looking for all sorts of great people. The one thing I would say is if you're in
Ottawa.
And we're in Ottawa. Yeah, thank you. I should have said that first. Marwan told me to say that. I should have said it. We're in Ottawa. If you're in San Francisco, we're there as well. If you're the kind of person that is comfortable in a fast, quick-paced environment, Veem is a great place for that.